In this part of the country, we have access to abundant and amazing adventures in our great outdoors.
Outdoor enthusiasts flock to Vermont for its incredible ski mountains. In the warmer months, locals and visitors alike enjoy kayaking, mountain biking, and more in the state's incredible parks and recreation areas. But who is being left behind? I'm at the University of Vermont to speak with Marie Vea, an assistant dean at UVM's Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources. Marie has a passion for the outdoors and social justice issues.
There's a culture around, particularly in Vermont, there's a culture around downhill skiing, there's a culture around biking that is manifested through the gear, through the language, through how to just get yourself to the mountain, and then all of the literal gates that you have to pass through to actually get yourself there. You'll hear a lot about affordability of gear, and gear now is so technical that's a factor where I'm not going to go outside unless I have like the best jacket or like waterproof Gore-Tex boots. So I think that's kind of an obstacle. There are things that I find that my students take for granted because their families have always come to Vermont. You know, they've got a second home, or it was very natural to come to a ski mountain. So they already know these things, but if you did not grow up with that kind of background, it's just not part of your experience or knowledge.
Over the past few years, there has been increased recognition that these barriers have an outsized impact on people of color. Recently, Vermont companies Burton, Skida, and J. Peak signed onto a diversity pledge created by a group called the In Solidarity Project,
where they promised to engage in campaigns to increase access to outdoor recreation. Teresa Baker is one of the organization's co-founders.
I would go to Yosemite literally every month.
So Teresa, what inspired you to address this lack of diversity in our outdoor spaces and the outdoor industry?
I would just hop on Amtrak and go to Yosemite, not really paying much mind to anything other than being in Yosemite. So on one particular trip, for whatever reason, I started looking around and I didn't notice anyone that looked like me. Because I was in Yosemite for an entire week and didn't see one other Black person. I reached out to the National Park Service and I said, hey, you guys have an issue with visitation as it relates to people of color. And they said, we know, help us fix it. And that began my journey around trying to bring more attention to the problem around lack of diversity in our national parks. And eventually it expanded to the outdoor industry at large. And that's what, started the In Solidarity Project.
What's the key issue that the pledge is trying to address?
The assumption is that people of color are not outdoors, that we have never been outdoors. And that can't be further from the truth. And because the outdoor industry doesn't promote us like they promote white and male or white and female, again, people assume we've not been there.
The pledge hopes to address this by calling on CEOs of outdoor industries to hire a diverse workforce and executive leadership, as well as to incorporate more people of color into their marketing strategies, with the hope that if individuals see people who look like them engaging in nature, they will feel more welcome and inspired to explore the great outdoors as well.
With so many brands signing on to the pledge, how do you hold them accountable? How do you make sure these brands are doing the work?
All the brands are required to submit a pledge, and throughout the year, I work with them on various campaigns and projects to make sure that they are addressing some of the issues which brought the pledge into place in the beginning. After 8 months, they are required to submit a report stating what they're working on as it relates to the pledge, what they're still having problems with, and what they need help with. We had over 200 at one point, and we start removing them because if you're not doing the work, you're not going to sit there and point to the pledge and say, see, we care about diversity, we signed a pledge.
If you're wondering, the 3 Vermont companies we mentioned before are still on the list and are still doing the work. My final stop is to speak with artist and storyteller Dr. Carolyn Finney, author of Black Faces, White Spaces, reimagining the relationship of African Americans to the great outdoors, among other works on this issue.
Why do we see this lack of diversity in the first place?
The founding of this country is the origin, how this country was founded. Actually, that's the way I should say it, how this country was founded. I'm not trying to put down this country. I actually love this country. I'm from here. This is home in its broadest sense, you know. And I feel a lot of ways about that. And, you know, the thing I've always said, and all this land was stolen. There were indigenous people here, you know, for a millennia, right, before any of the rest of us arrived. So that in and of itself, without dissecting that anymore, is part of the issue. Another part of the issue is then we enslaved another group of people to work the land for free to build the backbone of our economy. After the Homestead Act, where you only had a handful of people of African descent who were allowed to homestead along with people of European descent, black land ownership got clipped. Access doesn't exist over here without being related to all of that legacy and history and understanding. Access isn't just about availability. When I was a Girl Scout, and so elementary school or, you know, junior high, my father would not let me go on any camping trips with the Girl Scout troop. There was one other African-American girl, and the woman who ran it was fabulous. And after a while, I don't know how he was convinced, he let me go on one overnight in the woods. My parents came from the South. They grew up really poor. You didn't go in the woods without a gun. You know, they grew up during Jim Crow segregation, and even though we were living in New York, a young black girl in the woods with people, no. There's a legacy of that we are still dealing with.
Why does this matter for someone, whether it's someone who doesn't get it or someone who's feeling excluded? Why does access matter?
When I first wrote Black Faces, White Spaces, I went around the country while it was a dissertation. Initially as a dissertation, and then when I was thinking of it as a book. And I interviewed mostly African Americans, and particularly older African Americans. I asked all the same questions, and they were all open-ended. But I would say, when I say environment, what do you think? What comes to mind? And it was surprising how many would either say, I don't have a story, or nobody's ever asked me that before. And the second can be true, but the first isn't, because everybody has a story. And then they proceed to tell me some amazing, moving, funny, dramatic story about remembering something with their grandmother, or going camping for the first time, or fishing with their uncle, or whatever it is in the outdoors. And I'm like, there it is. And then finding out how those values, those beliefs, how that informs the way that you show up in relationship to it, what moves you. You know, what aspect of the environment do you feel really close to? What are you afraid of in the environment? And some people say people. Some people say, I know the night really, I've always been scared of the night.
What would you say to yourself when you were younger, or to someone else who might feel that there's an exclusion or feeling separated?
The first question that I would ask anybody is, what do you love? You know, if we're having this conversation and someone's feeling stressed, or someone's feeling unsure of how they can move forward, you know, maybe can they do this if they're not feeling confident, whatever they're feeling around this work of building relationship. And the way that I heard your question was to the environment, not necessarily to people. I think it's hard to do one without the other, but let's just say for a second, the environment, I was like, well, what do you love? And so tell me a story. One of the exercises I give students that I work with is for them to write their environmental autobiography and do it in 3 to 4 pages. You know, sort of reflecting on what do I love? What do I love about the land? You know, there's no right way to answer that question. It's just your way. And when people understand what it is that they love, I think the ability to stand a little straighter and stand upright where they are to do the work they want to do and build that relationship better starts to come more naturally. So it's like coming to terms with like who we are in these outdoor spaces and bringing that to the story. Does that make sense?
I asked each of our participants for this piece about what the average person can do.
Reach out to some of these community affinity groups and say, hey, let me volunteer on one of your hikes or one of your climbs. Say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I don't have $1 million to give you, but what can I help you with?
literally sending out the welcome mat to people is a huge part of getting people to feel like, am I even welcome there? I think of like all of the effort and energy that goes to downhill skiing, like getting the gear on, getting the ticket, getting in line, you know, all of that. And how do I make that easier? And if not easier, how do I explain that to somebody in a way that isn't condescending, that doesn't send an absolute signal that you are so lucky to be here and I'm going to tell you all about how we're going to do this? How do we make that welcoming so that, yeah, hey, that's great. We want to have you here.
It's not just about somebody opening the door. It's about who opened the door. The person opening the door to that outdoor area, the trail, have they done the work? It's hard work for all of us, and I just want to make sure that I say that too. Be kind, forgive yourself, but remain curious so that you get up the next day and go, okay, here we go again. And isn't it a privilege to do so?